The elevator chime echoed through the marble lobby of Northbridge Capital, and Dominic Quincy stepped out with the same measured confidence that had carried him from Harvard Business School dropout to self-made CEO worth $300 million by 32. He scanned the unfamiliar conference room where his company's annual leadership training would take place, wondering why his head of operations had insisted on hiring an external consultant for something their internal team could handle. Then she walked in, and his entire world tilted sideways. Professor Fiona Nelson carried herself with the same quiet authority he remembered from 8 years ago, though her auburn hair was shorter now, falling just past her shoulders instead of down her back. She wore a navy blazer and cream blouse, professional and poised, her green eyes focused on the tablet in her hands as she set her materials on the conference table. She hadn't seen him yet, and Dominic found himself frozen in the doorway, transported back to those college classrooms where she had been the youngest professor in the business department, barely 30 years old, teaching strategy and innovation to undergrads who were either intimidated by her brilliance or harboring hopeless crushes. He'd been neither. He'd been desperate, angry, grieving his father's sudden death and trying to figure out how to save the small manufacturing company his dad had built from bankruptcy. While his classmates had treated her class like an academic exercise, Dominic had stayed after every lecture with real-world problems, raw questions about cash flow and creditor negotiations, and whether it was worth finishing school or diving into the wreckage immediately. She'd given him more than answers. She'd given him frameworks, introduced him to contacts, stayed late in her office reviewing his plans. When he'd finally made the decision to leave school and fight for his father's legacy, she'd been the only person who'd told him he was making the right choice. "You can always come back to finish," she'd said on his last day. "But your father's employees can't wait 2 more years. Trust your instincts, Dominic. You're going to surprise everyone, including yourself." She'd been right. He'd turned the failing factory into a thriving enterprise, then sold it for enough capital to start Northbridge Capital, a private equity firm specializing in rescuing and revitalizing struggling businesses. Everything he'd built traced back to those after-class conversations, to the confidence she'd helped him find. "Professor Nelson," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. Her head snapped up, and for a moment her professional mask slipped. Her eyes widened, lips parting in genuine surprise. "Dominic Quincy, I should have recognized the company name." She set down her tablet and he caught the faint flush creeping up her neck. "Though I suppose I shouldn't call you Dominic anymore, Mr. Quincy, or do you prefer something else?" "Dominic is fine. It's always been fine, especially with you." He stepped fully into the room, closing the distance between them. "I had no idea you were our consultant. My operations director handles these arrangements." "I left academia 3 years ago," Fiona explained, and he noticed she was gripping the edge of the table like she needed the support. "I started my own consulting firm, working with companies on leadership development and organizational culture. When your team reached out, I never connected it to you. Quincy is a common enough name, and honestly, I thought you'd gone back to Michigan to run your father's company. I did. Then I sold it and started something new." He should step back, give her space, but he couldn't seem to move. She looked almost exactly as he remembered, maybe a few fine lines at the corners of her eyes, but still striking, still carrying that spark of intensity that had captivated him when he was 23 and too overwhelmed to admit it. "How have you been?" "Good. Busy." "My firm has grown faster than I expected." Her smile was tentative, uncertain. "I read about you in Forbes last year. The article called you the savior of dying companies. I thought about reaching out to say congratulations, but I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Remember you." The words came out sharper than he intended, almost accusatory. "Professor, you changed my entire life." The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with unspoken history. Fiona broke eye contact first, looking toward the windows overlooking downtown Boston. "I simply gave you permission to trust yourself. You did all the actual work." Before he could respond, the conference room door burst open and his leadership team began filing in, 8 executives talking and laughing, clutching coffee cups and laptops. The moment shattered. Fiona straightened, her professional demeanor sliding back into place like armor. Dominic forced himself to move to the head of the table, taking his seat while his mind raced with 1,000 questions he couldn't ask in front of his staff. The training session was supposed to focus on adaptive leadership and change management, topics Dominic normally found straightforward. But watching Fiona command the room, challenging his executives with case studies and Socratic questioning, he found it impossible to concentrate. She was brilliant, drawing out insights from even his most reserved directors, creating an environment where people felt safe admitting uncertainty. This was what she'd done for him all those years ago, creating space for him to voice fears and doubts without judgment. Halfway through the morning, she presented a scenario about a CEO facing pressure to pursue aggressive expansion despite concerns about company culture. "What would you advise?" she asked the room. His CFO jumped in with financial projections. His head of sales argued for market capture. But Dominic kept his eyes on Fiona, watching the subtle way she guided the conversation. And suddenly, he was 23 again, sitting across from her in that cramped office, admitting he was terrified of failing his father's memory. "Sometimes the bravest decision is to say no," he said, interrupting his team's debate. The room fell silent, everyone turning to look at him. "Growth for its own sake destroys companies. If expansion threatens your values or your people, it's not worth it." Fiona's eyes met his across the table, and he saw recognition there, remembered wisdom coming full circle. "Exactly," she said softly. "That's exactly right." The rest of the day proceeded in a blur of exercises and discussions. Dominic participated when necessary, but spent most of his energy trying not to stare at his former professor like a lovesick teenager. When 5 o'clock arrived and his executives began packing up, relief and disappointment warred in his chest. Same time tomorrow. His operations director confirmed with Fiona. "This was excellent, exactly what we needed." "Tomorrow," Fiona agreed, already organizing her materials. The team filtered out, chatting about dinner plans and deadlines. Dominic lingered, pretending to check messages on his phone. When the last person left, Fiona looked up at him. "You don't have to stay. I'm sure you have better things to do than watch me pack up." "Have dinner with me," he said abruptly. "Please, I'd like to catch up properly, hear about everything you've been doing. I owe you at least a dozen meals for all the times you stayed late to help me." She hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Dominic, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I'm here in a professional capacity. So we'll have a professional dinner." He knew he should let it go, but something in him refused. "Come on, Professor, don't tell me you're not even a little curious about what happened after I left school." "I know what happened. I read the articles. Articles don't tell the real story." He softened his tone, trying for sincerity instead of pushiness. "And I want to hear your story, too. Why you left teaching, how you built your firm. No agenda, I promise, just 2 old friends reconnecting." She studied him for a long moment, and he could practically see her weighing options, analyzing risks. Finally, she sighed. "One dinner, somewhere quiet, and you're paying since you're apparently worth hundreds of millions now." "I'll even let you order dessert," he said, grinning. They ended up at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, tucked away from the tourist crowds. The owner greeted Dominic by name and led them to a corner booth with soft lighting and checked tablecloths. As they settled in, Fiona raised an eyebrow, a regular spot. "I come here to think sometimes. The owner, Marco, doesn't hover or make small talk. He just brings food and leaves you alone." Dominic accepted the wine menu, then handed it directly to her. "You pick. I never developed a sophisticated palate, still living on coffee and determination." She asked, but her tone was warm, teasing. "Pretty much, though I've upgraded from ramen to actual groceries." They ordered, and as Marco poured wine, the initial awkwardness began to dissolve. Fiona asked about the manufacturing company, and Dominic found himself telling her things he rarely discussed with anyone about the brutal first year, the employees he'd had to lay off, the guilt that still haunted him even though he'd saved far more jobs than he'd eliminated. "You made impossible choices," Fiona said quietly. "That's what leadership is sometimes, choosing between bad options and living with the consequences." "You taught me that," he reminded her. "You told me that honesty was worth more than optimism, that I had to face reality before I could change it. I gave you permission to trust what you already knew." She swirled her wine, thoughtful. "You were so young but so determined. I remember thinking you were either going to succeed spectacularly or burn out completely. I'm glad it was the former." "What made you leave teaching?" he asked, steering the conversation toward her. "You were incredible at it. Those students had no idea how lucky they were." She was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in her expression, a shadow of old pain. "I loved teaching, but the politics became exhausting. Publish or perish committee meetings that accomplished nothing, watching administrators make decisions based on money instead of students. 3 years ago, a company approached me about doing a workshop, and I realized I could have more impact outside academia, so I took the leap. Scary, terrifying. I spent the first 6 months convinced I'd made a horrible mistake." She smiled ruefully. "But then the clients started coming, the word spread, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle. I brought on 2 associates last year. We're doing well." "You sound surprised." "I am, a little. I spent my whole career in universities. Turns out the real world suits me better than I expected." Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Fiona asked about his personal life, and he admitted it was practically non-existent, that he dated occasionally but nothing serious. That work consumed most of his energy. She confessed to similar struggles, laughing about disastrous setup attempts by well-meaning friends. "I'm married to my business," she said, "which sounds sad when I say it out loud, but honestly, I'm happy. I love what I do." "Nothing sad about that," Dominic said, "though I refuse to believe there isn't a line of men waiting for your attention." She gave him a look, something between amusement and exasperation. "Dominic. What? It's true. You're gorgeous, brilliant, successful. If you're single, it's by choice. Careful. You're starting to sound like you're flirting with your former professor." The words hung between them, simultaneously playful and serious. Dominic met her eyes, refusing to back down. "What if I am?" Fiona set down her fork, and he watched her compose herself, saw the exact moment she decided how to handle this. "Then I'd remind you that I'm 40 years old, you're 32, and I'm currently employed by your company. This is complicated. 8 years isn't a big age gap, and the consulting contract ends in 3 days. He leaned forward. "I'm not that overwhelmed kid anymore, Professor." "I know what I want, do you?" Her voice was gentle but challenging. "Or are you confusing gratitude with attraction? I helped you during a difficult time. That doesn't mean you owe me anything, including romantic interest." "Is that what you think this is, gratitude?" He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she'd have to actively pull away to avoid contact. "I had a crush on you 8 years ago that I was too busy surviving to acknowledge. Seeing you today, watching you work, talking with you now, I realize it wasn't just a crush. You fascinate me, you always have." She didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. "This is a bad idea, probably, but I've built my entire career on calculated risks." He let his fingers brush hers just barely. "Have dinner with me again tomorrow. A real date this time, not 2 colleagues catching up. Let me take you somewhere nice and see what happens. Dominic. If you say no, I'll accept it and we'll keep things professional for the rest of the training. No pressure, no awkwardness, but if there's even a chance you feel something too, give us a shot." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd refuse. Then, slowly, she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. "1 date, after the training ends. And if this turns into a disaster, you're the one who has to explain it to your operations director. He grinned, feeling like he'd just closed the deal of his life. Deal. The next 2 days of training were exquisite torture. Watching Fiona lead his team, knowing they had plans for Friday night, made it nearly impossible to focus. He caught her glancing at him occasionally, small smiles when their eyes met, and the anticipation built like a physical thing between them. When the training finally concluded Thursday afternoon, his executives gave Fiona a standing ovation. She accepted their praise graciously, deflecting credit and emphasizing their own insights. After everyone left, Dominic found her in the conference room, packing up her materials one last time. "So," he said, "tomorrow night, I'm thinking that French place on Newbury Street, the one with the impossible reservation list." She looked up, surprised. "You can get us in there. I know people. 7 o'clock work for you." "Dominic, that's too much. We can go somewhere normal." "I don't want normal. I want to take you somewhere that matches how extraordinary you are." He stepped closer. "Let me do this right." Her expression softened. 7 o'clock, but I'm driving myself. This is still technically our first date. Fair enough. Friday evening arrived with agonizing slowness. Dominic spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, finally settling on a charcoal suit without a tie, trying for sophisticated but not stuffy. He arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, then paced the sidewalk until he spotted Fiona's car. She emerged in a black dress that made his mouth go dry, elegant and simple with her hair swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck. When she reached him, she was grinning. "You're nervous," she observed, completely terrified, he admitted. "I negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but taking you to dinner has me feeling like a teenager." "Good, I'd hate to be the only one." She took his offered arm. "Let's see if this restaurant lives up to the hype." It did. The food was exceptional, but Dominic barely tasted it, too focused on Fiona across the candlelit table. They talked about everything, their conversation ranging from philosophy to stupid movies they secretly loved. She told him about growing up in Vermont, about her parents who still didn't quite understand why she'd left teaching, about the brother she adored who worked as a park ranger. He shared stories about his childhood in Michigan, about his father's quiet determination, about the pressure of being an only child trying to live up to impossible expectations. "Do you regret not finishing your degree?" she asked over dessert. "Sometimes. Not because I need it for my career, but because I hate leaving things unfinished. It feels like an open loop," he smiled. "Though going back now would be strange. You could get an honorary degree. Schools do that for successful alumni. It wouldn't be the same. I'd want to earn it properly, do the actual work." He paused. "Is that crazy?" "No, it's admirable. Most people in your position would just accept the shortcut." After dinner, they walked along Newbury Street despite the November chill. Fiona shivered, and Dominic immediately shrugged off his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. She pulled it close, breathing in. "Smells like you," she said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that was weird." "Not weird, sweet." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "I don't want this night to end." "Me neither. But I should probably get home before I do something impulsive." "Like what?" She stopped walking, turning to face him. The streetlights cast shadows across her face, making her eyes look darker, deeper. "Like kiss you and completely blur every professional boundary I've ever maintained." His heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm okay with blurred boundaries. Dominic, we need to be smart about this. I have a reputation to maintain. If word gets out that I'm dating a former client, it could damage my firm's credibility. So we're careful, discreet. I don't care if we have to keep this quiet for a while as long as we get to keep seeing each other." She studied his face, and he could see her wavering. "This is complicated." "The best things usually are." He cupped her face gently, giving her every opportunity to pull away. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me I'm imagining the connection between us, and I'll back off right now." Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. Dominic responded carefully, letting her set the pace, trying to pour 8 years of admiration and longing into the gentle press of his lips against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, she rested her forehead against his chest. "We're doing this," she whispered. "We're really doing this. Only if you want to. I meant what I said, no pressure." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I want to. I'm terrified, but I want to. Just promise me we'll take this slow, figure things out as we go. I promise. Though fair warning, I'm going to want to see you constantly. I have to travel for work sometimes, clients all over the country. I'll miss you every second you're gone," he said seriously, and watched her expression melt into something tender and unguarded. They started dating in earnest after that, stolen evenings between their demanding schedules. Dominic would show up at her apartment with takeout after she returned from consulting trips, and they'd eat on her couch while she told him about difficult clients or breakthrough moments. She attended his company events as his guest, and if his employees noticed their CEO was suddenly happier, more relaxed, no one commented directly. 2 months in, Dominic's mother came to visit from Michigan. He told her he was seeing someone but had been vague about details, not sure how to explain that his girlfriend had been his college professor. Over dinner at his penthouse apartment, Fiona charmed his mother effortlessly, asking about her garden and her book club, sharing funny stories that had the older woman laughing until tears streamed down her face. Later, after Fiona left and his mother was staying in the guest room, she cornered him in the kitchen. "She's wonderful," his mother said. "A little older than I expected, but clearly good for you. You're different with her, lighter. She makes me happy, Mom, happier than I've been in years." His mother hugged him tightly. "Your father would have liked her. She's got that same quiet strength he had, that way of making you believe in yourself." The observation hit Dominic square in the chest. His mother was right. Fiona carried some of the same qualities his father had possessed, that steady confidence, that ability to see potential in people and situations others had written off. Maybe that was part of what drew him to her, that echo of the person he'd lost. But it was more than that, too. Fiona challenged him, made him think harder, laugh more, want to be better. In March, 6 months after they'd reconnected, Fiona's consulting firm landed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company. The celebration dinner turned into a weekend trip to Cape Cod, their first real vacation together. Walking along the beach at sunset, Dominic pulled her close. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. She stopped walking. "What? Move in with me? Your lease is up next month and you're at my place half the time anyway. It makes sense." "Dominic, that's a big step, I know. But I'm ready for big steps. I'm in love with you, Fiona, completely, hopelessly in love with you." The words came easily, inevitable. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life together, not just snatch stolen moments between our schedules." Her eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too, so much, but living together means going public properly, no more keeping this quiet." "Good, I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you. I want everyone to know." She kissed him there on the beach, salt air and fading sunlight surrounding them. "Okay, yes, let's do it." Moving in together was chaos and joy in equal measure. Fiona's practical minimalism clashed with Dominic's tendency to accumulate books and gadgets, but they figured it out, creating a space that felt like both of them. Her colleagues were surprised by the relationship but supportive. His team threw them a party that felt part celebration, part interrogation of the mysterious woman who'd captured their boss's heart. A year passed in a blur of morning coffee and late-night conversations, business trips and quiet weekends, arguments about whose turn it was to handle laundry and makeup sessions that left them both breathless. Dominic had never been happier, never felt more grounded and ambitious simultaneously. Fiona pushed him to think bigger, to consider the social impact of his business decisions, to remember that numbers on a spreadsheet represented real people's lives. In return, he encouraged her to scale her consulting firm more aggressively, introduced her to contacts who could help, celebrated every victory, and talked her through every setback. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other's dreams while building something together. On the anniversary of their first official date, Dominic took her back to the French restaurant where it had all begun. They ate slowly, reminiscing about that first nervous evening, how far they'd come. "I have something for you," he said as dessert arrived. Fiona raised an eyebrow. "You already gave me those earrings this morning. This is different." He pulled out a small velvet box and watched her expression shift from curiosity to shock. "Before you panic, just listen." He opened the box, revealing a simple but stunning diamond ring. "Fiona Nelson, you changed my life twice. Once when I was a lost kid trying to save my father's legacy, and again when you walked into that conference room and reminded me what it feels like to be truly seen. You make me better, braver, happier. You're my partner, my best friend, the person I want to build everything with." His voice roughened with emotion. "Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." Tears streamed down her face. "Dominic, you don't have to prove anything. You never did. I'm the lucky one." She held out a shaking hand. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, then moved around the table to kiss her properly, not caring that other diners were watching and applauding. Nothing mattered except this woman, this moment, this perfect rightness of finding each other against all odds. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Vermont, surrounded by family and close friends. Fiona's father walked her down the aisle of the country chapel where she'd been baptized, and when Dominic saw her in her simple white dress, flowers in her hair, he had to blink back tears. His vows were short but sincere. "You taught me to trust myself, to take risks, to believe in second chances. Now I'm asking you to take the biggest risk of all and build a life with me. I promise to support your dreams, challenge your assumptions, and love you with everything I am for as long as I live." Hers were equally direct. "You walked into my classroom with raw determination and a broken heart, and you taught me that sometimes the best thing a teacher can do is step aside and let their student fly. You've exceeded every expectation, but more than that, you've shown me what it means to love completely. I promise to be your partner, your confidant, your home, always." The reception was a joyful blur of dancing and laughter. Dominic's mother cornered Fiona at one point, hugging her tightly. "Thank you for making my son so happy. His father would have adored you." "I wish I could have met him," Fiona said softly. "In a way, you did. You helped his son become the man he was meant to be. That's the greatest gift you could have given our family." 2 years into their marriage, Fiona surprised him by suggesting they start a foundation together. "We're in a position to help people the way others helped us," she said over breakfast one Saturday. "Scholarships for students who have to leave school for family emergencies. Grants for small businesses facing hardship. We could make a real difference." Dominic loved the idea immediately. They spent months planning, eventually launching the Quincy Nelson Foundation with an initial endowment of $10 million. The foundation's first recipient was a young woman whose single mother had fallen ill, forcing her to drop out of college to become the family's primary earner. They provided not just tuition assistance but business mentorship and support services. Meeting that first recipient, watching her cry with relief and gratitude, Dominic felt something shift inside him. This was why he'd worked so hard, why he'd taken those risks. Not just to accumulate wealth, but to create opportunities for others facing the same impossible choices he'd faced. "Your father would be so proud," Fiona whispered that night as they reviewed applications together in bed, her head resting on his shoulder. "He'd be proud of us," Dominic corrected. "This was your idea, your heart for people, your belief that everyone deserves a chance." She kissed his jaw. "Our idea, our foundation, our life together." 3 years after their wedding, on a crisp October evening, Fiona told him she was pregnant. They'd been trying for months, had started discussing fertility treatments if it didn't happen naturally. The positive test felt like a miracle. "We're going to be parents," she said, wonder and terror mixing in her voice. "I'm 45 years old, Dominic. This is going to be complicated." "Everything worth doing is complicated," he reminded her, using her own words back. "We'll handle it together, just like everything else." The pregnancy was difficult, high risk because of Fiona's age, but she approached it with the same determined focus she brought to everything. Dominic attended every appointment, held her hand through morning sickness and back pain and anxiety about 1,000 potential complications. When their daughter arrived 6 weeks early, tiny but healthy, they both cried holding her for the first time. They named her Deanna, after Dominic's father David and Fiona's mother Anne. Deanna Quincy came home from the hospital after 2 weeks in the NICU, and suddenly their carefully ordered life became beautifully chaotic. Fiona scaled back her consulting work to part-time, focusing on her family and the foundation. Dominic restructured his role at Northbridge Capital to allow more flexibility, promoting key executives and delegating more responsibility. They hired a nanny to help, but did as much themselves as possible, figuring out diaper changes and feeding schedules and sleep deprivation together. One night, 3 months after Deanna's birth, Dominic woke to find Fiona's side of the bed empty. He found her in the nursery rocking their sleeping daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside the chair. "What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. I'm just so happy it scares me." She looked at him, moonlight from the window illuminating her face. "8 years ago, you were a student sitting in my office and I was a professor trying to help. I never imagined this, us, her, this whole beautiful life." "I imagined you," he confessed. "Not like this exactly. But even back then, some part of me knew you were special, that you'd be important to me. I just had no idea how important." She reached for his hand with her free one. "Do you ever think about the timing? If you hadn't dropped out, if we'd tried to date when you were still my student, it would have been impossible. Wrong. The timing was perfect," he said firmly. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. You helped me become someone worthy of you, and now we get forever." "Forever," she echoed, smiling through her tears. "I like the sound of that." 5 years later, their lives had settled into a rhythm that felt right. Deanna started kindergarten, a bright, curious child who loved books and asked endless questions. The foundation had helped over 200 students and 50 small businesses. Northbridge Capital continued thriving under Dominic's leadership, though he'd become more selective about projects, focusing on companies that aligned with their values. Fiona published a book on ethical leadership that became a bestseller in business circles. She gave talks around the country but always made it home for bedtime stories with Deanna. They'd found balance, the elusive work-life integration that so many chased but few achieved. On their 7th wedding anniversary, they returned to Cape Cod, bringing Deanna this time. Walking the same beach where he'd proposed they live together, watching their daughter hunt for seashells, Dominic pulled Fiona close. "Happy?" he asked. "Impossibly happy, almost suspiciously happy. Like I should be waiting for the other shoe to drop. No shoe, just this, us, for the rest of our lives." She turned in his arms, wrapping hers around his neck. "I love you, Dominic Quincy, my former student, my husband, my partner in everything. Thank you for staying after class all those years ago. Thank you for being brave enough to leave school and chase your dreams. Thank you for walking back into my life and refusing to let me keep things purely professional. Thank you for seeing something in that scared kid worth nurturing. Thank you for taking a chance on us when it would have been easier to keep things simple. Thank you for loving me, for Deanna, for this life we've built." He kissed her softly, deeply, tasting salt air and forever. "I'd go through it all again, every struggle and setback, just to end up here with you." Deanna ran up then, demanding they come see the starfish she'd found, and they broke apart laughing. Hand in hand, they followed their daughter down the beach, the sunset painting everything gold and perfect. Dominic thought about that lost 23-year-old who'd walked into Professor Nelson's office with more problems than solutions, about the professor who'd given him not just advice but belief in himself. That connection had seemed so simple then, just a teacher helping a struggling student. Neither of them could have predicted it would become the foundation of everything, that the mentor would become the match in ways neither had imagined possible. But life surprised you like that, Dominic had learned. The people who shaped you could become the people who completed you. The relationships that started professionally could transform into something sacred. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the person who taught you how to save your father's legacy would end up helping you build your own, would become your wife, the mother of your child, your forever. He looked at Fiona, watching her help Deanna examine the starfish with scientific curiosity, and felt gratitude so profound it bordered on pain. This was what success really meant, not the money or the recognition or the companies saved. This, love given and returned. A family built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. A daughter who would grow up knowing both her parents chose each other deliberately, loved each other completely. That night, after Deanna fell asleep and they sat on the deck of their rental cottage watching stars emerge, Fiona rested her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. How far we've come. How grateful I am. How much I'm looking forward to the rest of our lives together. Getting sentimental in your old age," she teased. "Absolutely, you've made me soft." He kissed the top of her head, "and I wouldn't change a single thing." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to waves crash against the shore, holding each other as the night deepened around them. Two people who'd found each other across time and circumstances, who'd built something extraordinary from a foundation of respect and trust. Teacher and student, mentor and protege, and finally, inevitably, two hearts recognizing their match in each other. It wasn't the story either had planned, but it was the one they'd created together, and it was perfect.